Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the facts and what you need to know about EV charging, specifically second-hand EV charging. So, before we actually get going, we probably need to define about the charging space and the two types of charging, because some people may not know. So basically, there are two types of charging: AC charging and DC charging, sometimes called home charging and rapid charging. So let's start with home charging. There's really probably two things in the game. There's a wall box charger, one you have installed by an electrician, and that typically would give you about 7.2 kilowatts of charging capability. And there's also the standard, sometimes called the granny plug, or a 3-pin plug, or a general household plug version, and those are usually capable of charging at a maximum of about 2.3 kilowatts. Now, typically at home, you'll have, well, it'll be this sort of cable. This is what they call a Type C cable, and that's a cable I use to charge this EV at home. And I use this sort of granny plug, 3-pin plug, looks like a big laptop charger, to charge this vehicle. If you've got a wall box, so you'd have with a wall box, you'd have exactly the same Type C cable that I just showed you just a second ago, but you'd be able to charge at about 7.2 kilowatts per hour instead of 2.3, which typically you get out of the granny plug that I use. The charging socket for the EV can be found usually on the front or the side, and this is the connector it plugs into. Now there's another bit below that, which I'll talk about in just a second, but generally that's what it should look like. That charge port is known as a CSS port. Now, the majority of EVs that you'll find will probably have that. There are some older ones, and when we're talking about used EVs, it's important to mention, there is a different type of socket. It's called a CHAdeMO, I think that's how you say it. But that's pretty much, the Nissan Leaf is probably the most popular car with that charging cable. Now, that charging cable is perfectly fine. At services and rapid chargers, things like that, there's plenty of those cables, especially in the UK, but it is a standard that's been kind of replaced with this CSS charger, a bit like VHS and Betamax. So moving on to DC charging or rapid charging, this is this typical thing. You would use the connector, the whole of the connector, the CSS connector, like I said, and typically you would find those chargers at service stations, supermarkets, and all that stuff, and they could rapidly charge your battery. But I should say as well, also quite a few of them have a Type 2 standard size 7.2 kilowatt charger on them as well, depending on obviously the charge point itself and the facilities they have. But generally speaking, the service station or car park ones or supermarket charging stations usually have some form of rapid charging, which is what I want to get into now. So typically at home, I've said in one of the other videos, for me the maths of buying this particular car didn't work unless I can charge at home. As you've seen already, I charge off the kind of granny, the slowest cable. Now, to figure out how long that's going to take and whether it's going to fit for you, you need to take the maximum charge rate, in this case it's 2.3 kilowatts, and divide that by your actual battery capacity, which will give you your charging time on the 3-pin cable. So, in my example, the Kia Niro behind me is 64 kilowatt hour. I can charge at 2.3 kilowatts, meaning if I was to plug it in from zero into the 3-pin plug that I use to charge, it would take about 34 hours to completely charge. Now, some people might be thinking, oh my God, that's just horrific, which is pretty slow, I must admit. But the important thing here is you need to decide whether that fits in with your lifestyle or not. Now, my commute itself is probably 35 miles per day. The car's reliable range, even in winter, of around 220 miles, meaning that if I start the week at a reasonable charge level, coming home at night, I can plug this charger in and charge in my tariff times, which is 5 hours overnight where the electricity is really cheap. And I'll put back enough capacity to cover the following day's commute, if that makes sense. So if I start the week at 200 miles, I'll probably finish the week with about 140, 150 miles. So day to day, that really isn't an issue for me. Now, if I had a wall box charger, a home wall box charger, like a 7.2 kilowatts, you can figure that out. That's roughly 3 times the speed of the charger I'm using. So instead of 30 hours, it'd be more like 11 hours to do a full charge. But that really does depend on your commute and your lifestyle. But I think you'll be surprised if you actually do the maths. You could probably get by without installing a wall box charger and use the 3-pin plug. Day to day, I think the average UK commute is probably 25 to 30 miles. So with the range possibilities that we have with the Kia, that would actually work for a lot of people where initially maybe they wouldn't think it would. The super interesting bit, now we've covered that, is the DC side of things, because with your EV, if you plug it into a rapid charger, it'll go, like for example, from 20 to 80% really, really quickly, which is great if you need a quick charge. And then from 80 to 100, it's a bit slower, like the classic Elon Musk kind of metaphor where you have an empty car park and you're trying to ram loads of cars in and fill it up. Well, initially, cars can park really quickly because there's loads of spaces. As the car park increases, the time to find a car parking space gets more and more because there's less spaces available. So that's a really good analogy for the charging. But this is the thing I wanted to talk about with second-hand EVs, because a lot of the EVs in the market between sort of 2019 up to like 2023, 24, they may have a slower sort of capacity rapid charge. For example, the Kia behind me, I think is 70 kilowatts an hour is the maximum it can do on DC rapid charge, where newer EVs will have 150, maybe 300, and lots of other, and that figure is going up all the time. So people think, that's not very good rapid charge, but I'm going to explain why I don't think that's such an issue. So with this EV and EVs around this age, you'll get a lower rapid charge rate. So, well, let's put this into a scenario. Let's decide whether or not paying the extra money, bearing in mind this car, like I said, between £10,000 and £13,000 for something similar sort of age, similar sort of battery specs, versus something new or nearly new, which could be £25,000 to £30,000, depending on how you do your finance, etc., etc. So we've got those two scenarios. So we're going on a big drive, a journey, let's say it's 400 miles for the sake of argument. So we won't get there on one charge. We will have to stop somewhere and charge. So you set off with your 240 miles of range, both, it should be said, in the new car and the old car, because the range isn't that much different between this one and its equivalent new model. The range is very similar, as is the battery capacity, which is something to be aware of. But anyway, we've started on this journey. We've driven 240 miles or 220 to 30 miles, let's say, and we pulled into the services to stop. Now, I don't know about you, but actually 230, 240 miles, that's quite a distance. That's going to represent, nearly 3 hours of driving, probably. At 3 hours of driving, I'm happy to stop and have a break, and you probably should, let's be honest. I mean, sometimes you'd want to press on or whatever it is, but I mean, in reality, if you've done 3 hours behind the wheel, it's probably time for you to take a break. And this is where it's interesting, because the newer car with the 150 kilowatt charging, rapid charging, will charge you back up to 80%. Let's say you've got 10 or 20% left. You come in and it will charge you back up in 28 minutes, I think the figures say, if you work it out. Whereas the car behind me, this car, would be 45 minutes to 80. So that's obviously quite a bit more time, which you would expect with the difference of charging capacities. But I'm actually saying the cost of buying that vehicle and those 15 minutes, I don't think it's enough. Let me put it how I think of it. So I do my drive, I stop. Typically you stop at the services, we're going to plug the car in, we're going to wander in, perhaps use the toilets, use the restrooms, maybe get a coffee, and head back to the car and carry on with our journey. So the only difference in my head between those two scenarios is I would drink the coffee outside on a sort of park bench or just get some fresh air and drink the coffee before leaving again, versus jumping back in the car with the coffee and carrying on. So 25, 28 minutes versus 45 minutes. I don't really think it's a big deal. I don't think it's worth paying all that much more money to be able to do that. And that's why I think, so you have potentially £30,000 versus £13,000, and what you're saving in real terms day to day on a long journey, if you do them sporadically, is 15 minutes. Now, to me, everything else being equal, car like for like in this example, I'm not prepared to pay all that extra money to save myself 15 minutes when I can actually just relax and have my coffee rather than drink my coffee whilst I'm on the road. I might be mad. What do you think? It certainly shouldn't put you off buying a second-hand EV because the charging times, the rapid charging times, are slower, maybe half as quick as perhaps the newer model. So with that in mind, we've got to make a decision, as prospective used EV buyers. Does that make a difference for you? In my case, absolutely not. The conclusion is that home charging is, on the whole, the majority is the same across the older vehicle and the newer vehicle, as are the battery capacities, as are the range. If you're comparing, certainly in this case, and I think it's true of other brands too, this e-Niro versus the newer shaped Niro, the specs are almost identical. So what you've got to decide for yourself is, do I want that? Bear in mind, we've got warranty, we've got everything else pretty much equipment wise like for like. So what we're really talking about is the difference between this vehicle and a much newer one, or even a brand new one, is the ability to charge the battery faster in rapid mode. Now for me, that really isn't a big deal because of the scenario I just explained. I don't think it's that big a deal. Maybe it is if you're constantly flying up and down the motorway. But, if you're constantly flying up and down the motorway and you're doing thousands of miles, I would argue that perhaps an EV isn't the way to go. But, like I said, that's my thoughts on it. I want to hear your thoughts on it. So get your questions and comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you can, share it out, because we made quite a good start with our other videos, and I thank everyone for the support we've had so far. But let's keep it going. Next video, we'll be doing more and more about range and all sorts of other cool topics, so get them all down below. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And one last thing, people, before we do go, I live in the southwest of the UK, and we've just had like storm upon storm upon storm and all that at the moment. Hopefully it'll be brightening up in the next couple of weeks, so we can get outside of the garage a bit more, do some driving around, do some actual road reviews and things like that. So stick with us, and I'll see you next time.